Goddamn, that's hard. Okay, that works. Had to double check. Cool. Back at it with the studying. I wasn't in the mood yesterday. I can't even lie. I just had a whole bunch of things going on, and life happens. So I wanted to make sure I at least got chapter 5 out of the way before the end of the week, because I was thinking about doing it at the end of the week, and I know myself, like, I'm going back home, a whole bunch of stuff is happening. I was like, I'm not going to get it done if I don't do it now. So here I am. I actually am super happy that I decided to create everything in a PowerPoint format. I didn't think that would be a good way to write notes, but it is, surprisingly. So I think I'm going to keep this format. As I said before, I am going to share this out once I finish and make all these corrections and XYZ. Like right now, I can see I missed a thingy. So like I'm a little bit of perfectionist in terms when it comes to putting things out, but I will share it out. And also I'm not finished with it because I'm adding notes as I go through each chapter. So I don't want to give you guys, unless you want individual notes, which seems a bit, yeah. Just, I'm going to send it out. Anyway, so this is chapter 5 for the AWS Solutions Architect exam. I've already done chapters 1 through 4, as well as an assessment test. You can probably see that. I should have linked that on my Twitter, depending on where you're watching this from. But on my Twitter, I have linked at the top of my profile each of the chapters videos that I've already gone through. I highly suggest going back and checking those out if you are studying for the exam, because I go through notes as I'm about to do now, and then we take a practice exam, like a chapter quiz at the end of each one, which is really helpful. Again, it's for people who just want some accountability, who want to get together and study. The study group that I was doing on Sundays is ended. I am going to create a longer practice exam, which is somewhere between 60 to 90 questions. So that way people can practice that way as well. But we can go ahead and get started. So chapter 5 had a bunch of key vocabulary regarding, of course, identity and access management, IAM, things like authentication, authorization, auditing, the different types of security credentials available within AWS, some information about users, groups, and roles, which is super important, especially as you're getting started and granting permissions to different resources, XYZ. They went over briefly about an IAM hierarchy of privileges. I added it. I don't know why. I don't know if it's important, but I put it. Then we have some IAM best practices, some compliance programs that you should be aware of, the shared responsibility model, which I'm an evangelist of, some AWS security products, and IAM EC2 roles, but I actually don't think I have that one because I didn't see it in the chapter. But so authentication, authorization, and auditing. Authentication, of course, about making sure you say who you are, so that way it's not somebody mama or somebody else trying to get in. That is you who's trying to get into your AWS account. There are 2 types of user accounts, or I should say authentication features. You can manage users and their access, or you can manage them through federation using an identity provider. We also have authorization, which is the other A, and that's just about making sure that you're doing what you're supposed to do, or you're authorized to access or take part in whatever it is that you're supposed to do. A keynote here is that policies when it comes to IAM is written in JSON format. I was going to say this music a little loud. Is written in JSON format. That is a question that comes up and that pops up. So it is important to remember that, especially, oh, dang, I thought I had included pictures. I'm going to go back when I do the final presentation, but so you can see of like what a policy looks like written in JSON format and what other variables included with creating a policy in this format. And then we have auditing. So auditing is about ensuring and providing compliance with company rules and strict regulatory guidelines, just making sure that you are logging somewhere everything that's happening within your environment, so that way you can go back and check, right? Which is super important if you're doing perhaps investigations or for compliance reasons, which is some of the ones that we'll get into later, who require you to maybe keep track of everything for 7 years, right? If you don't have anything like CloudTrail or some kind of logging management system enabled, then it'll be really hard for you to pass that audit. Cool. So the different types of security credentials. Oh, that's hot, sorry. I didn't even say. We have IAM username and password, pretty easy. Username and password, that's what majority of people use for accessing the management console. You have email address and password. You have access keys, which is often used with the command line or if using APIs or SDKs. You have a key pair, multi-factor authentication, also pretty self-explanatory, making sure that you have an extra layer. And then we have temporary credentials. So STS is something associated with temporary credentials, which is the security token service. So you can think of that as, the way I interpreted it was like how RSA, if you ever use RSA tokens or different kind of text message tokens, like something that can be sent to you, but is only in use for the next 30 minutes or so. So for example, I've used a service where, they send you a text message and say, hey, this code or this link or XYZ to authenticate yourself in or to use as a credential is only valid for the next 20 minutes. Otherwise, you have to go ahead and get another one. So it's not for long-term use. It's definitely only for short-term temporary use or like one-time login, basically. So we have users, groups, and roles. So a user is an entity that you create to represent a person or service, which can be kind of confusing for people who are just getting started with the cloud, because your person, so me, Dominique, is not, I'm not the entity in AWS or any cloud provider, right? It's my role or whatever is attached, like the permissions attached to my role, which can be really, really confusing. But essentially, the main takeaway here for understanding that definition is that you create a user to represent someone, right? So, and then based off of that user or the role, you assign permissions, like admin role, but we'll get to that in a second. There are two types of users. You have a permanent user, which means I'm a permanent entity within AWS, or you're a federated user. So federated comes from a third party, right? An identity provider that I have spoke to before. And if you're coming from a third party, you are not a permanent entity within AWS. The reason why I felt, at least coming from this chapter, why that was important is because when you're doing roles or there's different features, some of them are associated with a permanent one, some of them, aren't, so to speak. So if you're a federated user, you have to, or if you're using federation as an organization, you have to understand, well, how is that going to affect my users being able to do certain things within AWS? They did provide some steps to create a user, which is pretty straightforward, which is, why is my mouse not moving? Oh, I was like, what are you doing? Cool. Steps to creating a user, you just go into the IAM portal, you provide security credentials, you attach permissions, roles, and responsibilities to that user. So that's why I said, like, as a user, when I'm navigating AWS, it's as Dominique is not the entity, right? I can't do anything. I have no roles, no permissions, no XYZ. I only get the permissions when you assign a role to my person. So if I needed to be an admin, then, admin role will need to be assigned to me. If I'm in charge of databases or if I'm in charge of a certain service within AWS, then that specific service role needs to be assigned to my entity in order for me to navigate and do my everyday task jobs. And then once you do that, you can add users to a group, which is a best practice, which we'll get into a little bit later. So groups are a way to organize similar roles and permissions for an entity. So say, for example, I have a developer group, right? And I am ramping up on hiring, and I'm hiring, let's say 20 developers upcoming, right? Those developers need to have 10 permissions attached to them, right? They need to be able to maybe spin up their own virtual machine. Maybe they need to be able to access whatever service to write some code. Maybe they need to be able to deploy, whatever the case may be. They need a certain level of permissions assigned to them. If it would be really daunting if I had to do that for every single person, especially if I'm onboarding like 20 people. What you would do instead is you would create a group. So I would just, for simple purposes, I would just call it a developer group. And I would attach all of those permissions or a role to that group. And therefore, wherever I add someone to that group, they automatically get those permissions without me having to like do it manually and individually. So groups are a best practice that we'll see when we get to that section. But it's a really easy way to manage rather than trying to do every individual user, especially if you're a company. Like if you're just starting out, sure. Like if you have 20 people in your company, sure, you might not need to use groups because you don't have that many people, because then you might be managing too many singular groups rather than individuals. But if you're a company who's large or you expect to scale, it's you should start using groups early. And then roles. They can be assigned to both user groups to define a set of permissions. So like I was talking about, an admin role, a DBA role. There's all kinds of roles, I think hundreds of roles, if I'm not mistaken, if not thousands. And each one of those roles have different permissions attached to them. And the reason why identity and access management is so important to really understand and get right really early is because, you want to follow the principle of least privilege. So if you're giving someone too many privileges, like there should not be a whole bunch of admin roles at all. Like you should identify who your administrators are up front and make sure they have the permissions, or like if you are the administrator, make sure that you have the correct permissions. But everyone else should be getting specific service-specific roles that pertain to their job, and not the very over permissive roles or just attaching a whole bunch of them. And you should be going back and double checking that these people are supposed to still have this access, because that's what's wind up happening and gets a lot of these companies, is that they don't go back or they don't have a life cycle process when it comes to assigning users and roles. So for example, when it comes to contractors, right? And you have a contractor who's coming in for a certain amount of time, say for example, 6 months, and you assign them, you shouldn't be assigning them an admin role, but say you assign them some kind of role that, maybe have access to like sensitive data or something of that nature. And then all of a sudden, 6 months has passed by and you haven't double checked whether or not this contractor has been offboarded, or you don't have any conditions in place that will automatically take away his access. If you don't have that, now your contractor still has access after the fact to your environment. And that's how things like, I'm not going to call out the specific breach, but like the breaches that wind up happening because they didn't double check if people still have access to their environment, whether or not these credentials have been taken away from them. IAM lifecycle process, super important. Please, if the one thing that you get from this, watching this today, is that you understand the lifecycle of IAM and that you have conditions and rules set up properly from the get. Hierarchy of privileges. Of course, the root user is top dog around here. This is an unrestricted user who can do any and everything in your environment, including shut it down, start it up. They can change your billing, spin up a whole bunch of, they can do essentially anything. So it's super important that you make sure that you are not using root as an everyday user. You should definitely, once you get started in AWS, take away go ahead and create an admin role and assign yourself the admin role and use that for a day-to-day. Or maybe if you just say, hey, I don't need an admin role, I just need a security role, like whatever the use case may be. But you should not be using root user. I actually need to make that as a note, like do not use root user for everyday tasks, because then you'll wind up messing something up. IAM users, the regular user has limited permissions. And then again, temporary security credentials is third in this hierarchy. I don't know why. I mean, they had it in their chapter, so I assumed it was important, but I thought this was pretty, I thought this was pretty obvious, but I can understand for people who maybe don't understand AWS and cloud yet. So some best practices for identity and access management. The first one being always create a user for yourself and then assign admin privileges, which just goes back to saying like, do not use root. Like, don't use it. Create a strong password policy. I'm going to say my little bun about to come out. Make sure you create a strong password policy. They have to have it expire every 90 days. It is, I don't want to say controversial, but it's definitely been in conversation as to whether or not rotating password credentials is even necessary anymore. I personally definitely think so. I definitely don't think it should be as often as I remember, like way back when I was like just started getting in the field, where we had people changing their passwords like every 30 days. That's annoying. And that will definitely cause users to, start writing down their passwords and basically just start implementing security practices that you don't want happening within the workplace, simply because they're just getting fatigued and they're like, I'm creating a password too much. I'm tired of remembering a password. So they recommend every 90 days, which is essentially kind of like once a quarter. I have been with companies that do it even further or don't even rotate passwords, but it really just depends on your business use case. And like, especially if you're under regulation, then you definitely have to have an expiration date. Like that's not even a thing. Also rotating security credentials regularly. And security credentials was the other one the other page, if you remember, where rotating access keys and rotating multi-factor, like temporary, like making sure that these things are also being taken into consideration when you do your rotation. Enabling multi-factor authentication, of course. Managing permissions with groups, right? Which is what I was alluding to before, that groups is the best practice. It's best practice to use groups rather than trying to manage individuals individually. It's just easier because it helps you also grant least privileges. So that way you're not giving one person too many privileges. Managing with groups is a really good way to do that. But essentially, even if you don't use groups, making sure that you're granting least privilege. And least privilege is the concept that I'm only giving you as much permissions as you need to do your job. And that's it. You don't need anything further. So if you're in HR and you only need access to this one server or this one document or this XYZ, then I'm going to make sure you have that, but nothing else. Use IAM roles also for EC2 instances. So you can assign a role not only to an individual, but also to a service. That's not necessarily in this chapter. And I'm not sure it's in further chapters when I think I've already done EC2 actually. But essentially you can assign a role to a user and to a service, so that service can act on your behalf. So say if a service is doing a job and you need it to talk to a database, or you need, like say for example, you have a bunch of batching. So at the end of the day, you might have to run a bunch of batch queries, and you as an individual don't want to sit there and kind of do, especially if it gets into the hundreds of batches, like you don't want to do that. You can have a service kind of run that for you. So that way it kind of takes away the administration from your part. Make sure you use IAM policy conditions for extra security, and make sure you enable AWS CloudTrail, because again, you should be, as you set up your environment, you should be making sure that you have the ability to log and monitor and keep track of what's going on in your environment, because it makes no sense if you're going to set up this entire AWS cloud environment and somebody's, in your business doing whatever, and you have no idea how to even track. You don't know what changes have been made. You don't know when it happened. And then when you need to do an investigation, when you need to do an audit, when you need to explain yourself, like, why did this virtual machine get deleted, or why, like, especially if you have a big service, right, an e-commerce service, and you're like, why is my website down? And it's because someone was in our environment and did something. If you don't have security measures like that in place, you're a little assed out there. Then it went into some compliance programs. So understanding the different SOC levels, FISMA, FedRAMP, understanding PCI. They had a whole bunch of different ones that are industry specific, but then they have some that are industry specific. So I think this one was like the criminal justice, something of that nature. You have the Cloud Security Alliance, you have FERPA and HIPAA about health, and then MPAA, which is the Motion Picture Association, MPA. I know this is motion pictures, but So you might not need to know, unless you're in the health industry, you should definitely know HIPAA. Cloud Security Alliance, I recommend everyone to do it because it's the cloud. But as far as everyone else, I definitely recommend understanding SOC and understanding the 3 different SOC levels, because there is a difference between SOC 1, SOC 2, and SOC 3. If you're in federal, understanding that. If you are a company or if you work for an organization that processes transactional data, like understanding that one. You don't need to memorize and like be in depth, because you're not becoming an auditor, but you should definitely understand the basics of each one of these. Shared responsibility model. So I didn't have any notes because I always think this picture is pretty self-explanatory in getting people to understand what the shared responsibility model is and like how that would pertain to you in your company. So I always recommend when people are getting started to understand the shared responsibility model, but understand this in conjunction with the cloud deployment model, right? So cloud deployment models is infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service. Now, the reason why I say this is because that will help you understand what you're responsible for as an organization, and then what AWS or any cloud service provider is going to be responsible for. This is a very simple visualization of that. So AWS is responsible for security of the cloud, meaning all of the what's called the lower stack, so the bottom half of what it takes to build out your cloud infrastructure. So they're making sure that your foundational service like compute, storage, all of that is secure and safe, that your networking is secure and safe. They're making sure that the availability zones and regions in which people are utilizing for the cloud, right? You're essentially, when you're using a cloud service provider, you're essentially just using their hardware and software to do your work or to do whatever it is that you need to spin up. So they're making sure that hardware and software that they're implementing, that you're using, is safe and secure. But you have to take care at the top of everything else, right? The number one thing that people need to remember with this is data is always your responsibility. It doesn't matter who, what, where, when, why. Data is always your responsibility. So if something goes wrong and your data is out there, your data gets stolen, XYZ, you can't blame, like, it is up to you to make sure that you secure your data. And if you feel like, putting sensitive data like that was too much, then you should have made an executive decision to say, okay, I'm keeping my critical data on premise or at my data center or somewhere, just not in the cloud. So again, customer content, you're in charge of operating system, network, and firewall configurations, your server-side data encryption, client-side encryption, all of this. But remember, I always tell people to take this, or I should say, understand this model in conjunction with the cloud deployment model. Because, for example, as a software as a service, in a software as a service model, you're not responsible for this stuff, right? You're responsible for your data, but you're not responsible for you're not responsible for the operating system or networking or configuring firewalls, because software as a service means you literally just use that service. You put your data in it, they'll take care of everything else and you're good to go. But if you're using maybe platform as a service, then you start to get a little bit more responsibility. And if you're using infrastructure as a service, then all of this is your responsibility. But again, do this in conjunction with the deployment model, and I'll put a note in here when I share this out, so that way people can understand the two. Because looking at that is easy to understand, but you don't understand it if you don't know what cloud deployment model that you're using. All right, so then we have, and I think this is the last section before we answer some questions. So then we have some security products that they listed in conjunction, not necessarily just with IAM, but they were just listing some security products and services. So we have Resource Access Manager, which you can use to share your AWS resources with any other account. We have Secrets Manager, which I thought was the way that they had wrote it out in the notes was super funny, because it was like, do you have people who say that, they don't want to share credentials via email, or they're not comfortable sharing, XYZ, which happens because I've had one of those people. I'm not going to email. Girl, you want me to what? Send you my what? No. So Secrets Manager allows you to share credentials in a not only just share, retrieve, and view, rotate credentials, any kind of API keys in a lifecycle securely. So Secrets Manager is definitely a good way to share out passwords. Please do not email them. Many people do. I beg you, please don't do that. Amazon Guard Duty, an intelligent threat detection service for AWS, along with applications and services running them. Then you have Amazon Inspector, a service that analyzes EC2 instances to identify potential security and configuration issues, which is good. So if you're spinning up EC2 instances and maybe you don't want to keep track, you can use Inspector to kind of manage those vulnerabilities or manage the vulnerability management process for you. Some more products and services is Amazon Macy, which helps protect your data in S3 by helping you classify what data you have, the business value, and the behavior associated with that data, which is especially helpful for organizations who maybe haven't classified data yet, right? Because data classification, it can be a complicated task. I have been in organizations where I've helped or like indirectly tried to help do some data classification. And it's hard because you have to work with so many different, and mind you, they were a small company then, or smaller on the small end. But yeah, trying to figure out, first off, what data do you have? What data each one of your departments are processing, understanding what data is sensitive versus like what's okay data. And then especially when it comes to GDPR, like, are you collecting data from non-American citizens? Like, where's your information coming from? Is it coming from California? Do I have to? So like really understanding data can be super complicated, which is why, you know, data science and big data and all that kind of good stuff is such a big deal, because it is for so many companies. I think especially here in America, we're at a place where data just runs freely and we don't yet have federal or universal federal protection in terms of data privacy and how data is being accessed and processed in XYZ. So really understanding, like right now it's on the company to do this work. Unfortunately, a lot of companies aren't, or I should say every company is not. So Amazon Macy, if you are using that, can help you do that. Then we have Certificate Manager, you know, used to manage SSL certificates. We have web application firewalls to detect malicious traffic that is, you know, targeted at your web applications. We have AWS Shield, which helps manage services to protect against DDoS. We have HSM, which helps you protect your dedicated hardware security module in the cloud. And then you have KMS, which is Key Management System. I need to write that one out, which is just a service that helps you create and control and manage your encryption keys. All right, question time. Crap. I do this every time and I'm like, where am I going to write the answers to these questions? Okay, hold on. Let me do this. How do I bring that back? I have a notes section. Oh, there you go. I'm about to say, girl, don't play with me. All right, let's make this a little smaller. And let me, okay, cool. I'm going to write it in Notion because that's where I've been writing all of my things. So let's come here and here. All right, cool. This is chapter, 5? Is that chapter 5 and not a page? Chapter 5, right? Yes, empty. And let's just do 1 through 10 if I'm not mistaken. Cool. I think this is big. Hopefully you can see. Yeah? Cool. You don't need to see the chapter 5 up there. Cool. Question 1, can you add an IAM role to an IAM group? So before we were talking about groups and roles, whether or not you can, the difference between a IAM role, an IAM group, an IAM user, XYZ. So my answer here is going to be no, because you don't add roles to groups. you add users to groups, and then you assign a role to that user or group. So my answer is going to be no. 2, an IAM policy contains which of the following? Choose 2. It contains a username, an action, a service name, and availability zone. So availability zone is going to be out. Oh, wait, actually, yeah. Yes. So I'm going to say it's definitely going to have a username, and then it's going to have an action. Because I don't service name doesn't make sense to me in regards to an IAM policy, and neither does availability zone. So let's hope. So I'm going to say A and B. So question 3, what happens if you delete an IAM role that is associated with a running EC2 instance? So will any application running on the instance that is used in the role be denied access immediately? Will the application continue to use that role until it's shut down? The application will have access until the session is alive, or the application will continue to have access. I'm going to go with A, simply because if this is anything like roles and maybe GCP or some other things, once you take away access, like you're immediately, it's pretty live, so, or I should say real time, so you immediately do not have access anymore, or at least you shouldn't. So let's hope not. All right, number 4. For implementing security features, which of the following would you choose? A username and password, multi-factor authentication, using multiple S3 buckets, or logging in using the root user. So if you remember, I said earlier, logging in with root is a big no-no. You should not be doing that. Using multiple S3 buckets is not a security feature. Not sure why you would do that. Using multi-factor authentication is a extra security feature. And using a username and password isn't a security feature per se. To me, that is just a way to authenticate yourself. So I'm going to go with B again. And I hate using the same letter. I have B 3 times already, and I hate using the same letter because I'm like, something got to be wrong here. All right, 5, which is based on temporary security tokens. Please choose 2. You have Amazon EC2 roles, you have Federation, you have username and password, or using AWS STS. So off the bat, I know AWS STS is because that was a part of the notes that we have just gone over. So I know that's one of them. Your username and password is not based on a temporary security token. And an EC2 role doesn't even apply here because roles have nothing to do with temporary security tokens. So even if you didn't know that Federation is based on temporary access, just by being able to rule out A and C automatically leaves you B and D. So that might be a way to kind of do process of elimination in order to answer some of these questions. 6. So you want EC2 instances to give access without any username or password to S3 buckets. What is the easiest way of doing this? Do you use a VPC S3 endpoint? Do you use a signed URL? Do you use roles? Or do you share the keys between the S3 and the EC2 instance? Now, we haven't talked about VPC S3 in this chapter, but chapter 4, if I'm not mistaken, is about VPCs. But I don't think this applies to needing to grant access between an S3 bucket. Signed URLs I don't think applies here as well. And if you remember, we were talking about roles, and I said how roles can be assigned to a user and a service. And what that means is that service is acting on behalf of whatever it is that you need it to do without having to do a username and password, without having to assign, over permissions. You can use a role. So I'm going to say C, because I don't think you would share keys. Like that doesn't, because what if someone gets access? So, all right, number 7. An IAM policy takes which form? Again, I said this would be a question, and automatically it's C, because remember, everything, all IAM policies are written in JSON format, not in Python, nor in C or in XML. So 7 is C. 8, if an administrator who has root access leaves the company, what should you do to protect your account? Please choose 2. Would you add MFA to root? Would you delete all the IAM accounts? That's pretty intense. Okay. Would you change the password for all the IAM accounts and rotate keys? Or would you delete all the EC2 instances created by an administrator? No. This one, to me, when I read the answers, already is process of elimination, right? So deleting IAM accounts and deleting all the EC2 instances created by that administrator is unrealistic, especially if that administrator, say he started from the beginning of the company or beginning of the of a company being involved with AWS, and say he created a whole bunch of things that are pretty critical to your organization. Deleting that might cause some issues. So you definitely don't want to go that route, and you definitely don't want to delete IAM accounts, but you would definitely add MFA, right? And that's what typically you should do in your life cycle. So if you have an administrator who had root, if you add MFA, you can rotate those MFA credentials, or you can, I should say, revoke them, or revoke him being able to have access. So that way, if he does try to log in with his username and password, MFA would be attached to your organization or maybe another administrator who's currently with the company. And that way they would get that and would understand, like, hey, this someone's trying to get in. We need to, then you can decide, okay, do we delete this entire role? I mean, this user, do we detach it? Like, what do we do with it? But adding MFA is definitely one of the answers. And then, of course, because I said that the 2 deletes don't make sense in this scenario, then you would change the passwords for all the accounts and rotate keys. Excuse me. Wait, actually, hold on. Backtrack. Choose 2. Sorry, because now I see it says change the passwords. I thought it said change the passwords for the account and rotate the keys. Not all the IAM accounts. Why would I do that? That's interesting. I'm still going to stand by it. I'm still going to do C, but C doesn't make sense to me, because why am I changing? Unless they're saying all of the IAM accounts associated with this user, not all IAM accounts ever, period. I don't even actually want to write that one down, but I feel like the other ones don't really make sense. I'm going to have to do it. All right, number 9. Using the shared security model, the customer is responsible for which of the following? The security, choose 2. The security of the data running inside the database hosted in EC2? Yes. Maintaining the physical security of the data center? No. Making sure the hypervisor is patched correctly? No. And making sure the operating system is patched correctly? Yes. The reason why the hypervisor is not, because again, the hypervisor is part of the virtual machine in which the cloud service provider is giving you. So therefore, that is their responsibility. But you are installing operating machines on these virtual machines. Operating systems on these virtual machines, and therefore that's your responsibility. So the answers here would be, what did I say? A and B. All right, last one. In Amazon RDS, who is responsible for patching the database? A customer in Amazon. In RDS, you don't patch the database, or RDS does not come under the shared responsibility or security model. So D is out because it definitely does. I'm going to say C is out as well because everything needs to be patched. Now, relational database system is, I'm going to say under under the customer. Wait, I am confusion now. Damn. See, that's why you should know. So I didn't go through all of the Amazon services, but you should know with which one of their services is a software. Again, the cloud deployment model comes into play here. Is it something that you have to manage as a customer, like a full database, or is this something that maybe you don't have to manage? So I'm going to say when it comes to patching, sugar honey iced tea. I want to say Amazon, but I feel like it's going to say customer. But I'm going to say Amazon. Patching the database, I'm going to say is Amazon. Because I don't think you patch the database. Like as a customer, you shouldn't be like, I should just be responsible for putting my data in. I don't know. We're going to see. All right, where are the answers? In my other page. All right, give me 1 second. 1 second. Oh, right here. Can I move this over? So I got a lot going on here. As I have mentioned, I think I've mentioned here that I use O'Reilly to study. And that's where I've been getting a lot of this information from because they have an updated version and you could do a bunch of trials. Don't look at my name. Anyway, as you can see, what I'm a fan of. What's up, hey Jazz? Thanks for watching. I hope you guys get some value out of this. Cool. Wait, I'm an idiot. Why didn't I put my answers up here? I put this up here. That's not what I wanted. 1 second. Clearly, I need to get my life together. All right. I hate having to resize everything. What am I looking for? Okay. I'm like, Dominique, what are you trying to do right now? Stop it. All right. Cool. Let's see are our answers correct. I'm going to move this over just a smidget. All right. So number 1 is B. We did get that correct. Number 2, dang. B and C. I mean, it's B and C and not A and B because I was confused because I was like, oh, availability zone. I mean, not availability zone. It says a policy is not location specific and not limited to a user. So I need to go back. I'm going to go back and double check what C was. So 3 is A. Application will be denied access if you revoke the IAM user. Did it say choose to? Am I bugging? Well, at least I got 1 right. I hate that because I feel like I did that last time where it didn't say choose to, but then it had 2 answers here. And I'm like, girl, make up your mind. Like you didn't do that right. But I got 1 right, so that counts. Let me highlight what I did not get right. Move out of the way, Notion. God dang. Gosh darn it. So you don't want to highlight? You don't want to do that? Shift H. What is it telling me to do? Don't mind me. Sorry. So this is what I say where like how long it takes me to that Shift H. I did that. Anyway, because I be a perfectionist about just even coloring. So anyway, 4 is A and B, but I didn't get the A. 5 is B and D. 6 is C. 7 is C. 8 is A and C. 9 is A and D. And 10 is B. Good job. It is the customer's responsibility because RDS does come under the shared security model and it is a managed service. Good to know. So it's also really important to understand what's a managed service and what is not. So that way, again, you'll be able to answer these questions when it asks you like, hey, who, with this service, who's responsible for patching the operating system, right? If it's an infrastructure as a service, then you would be responsible for that. But if it's a managed service, then they would be responsible. But you would not know that if you didn't know whether or not it's managed or like what cloud deployment model it falls under, which is why I say when you're studying or you're understanding the cloud security model, the shared responsibility model, always take that and do that in conjunction with the cloud deployment model because it will help you understand what's a managed service, what's not, and what is actually your responsibility. Because imagine you have a database that isn't a managed service and you're responsible for patching and then you don't, right? So now a vulnerability, maybe a 0-day has come out and you don't know yet. And because it's not a managed service, Amazon is not going to push that out for you. That's under your responsibility. So keep that in mind. I wanted to go back to question 4. You see, that's what I'm talking about. It does not say choose to here. They playing with me. I don't like that. And then number 2 is an IAM IAM policy contains which of the following. So they said it contains an action and a service name. All right. Okay, so it's not attached to a username. That's good to know. Okay, cool. Well, this was chapter 5. I'm going to, depending on where you're watching this, I'm going to reattach this to Twitter, to the thread I have, so that way you can see. Again, I've done chapters 1 through 5 now, along with the assessment test, so you can view all of that good stuff. I'll be back with chapter 6 next week. How many chapters are in here? Oh, there's only 9. Okay, so we only have 1, 2, 3, 4 chapters left. And actually, I think the last chapter is yeah, we'll do that one. So we have about 4 chapters left. I think I'm probably going to start doubling up because that way I can knock it out. So I might do chapter 6 later on this week. Actually, I should do it tomorrow because I know myself. Again, if I wait till the end of the week, I'm not going to do it. So if I have time, I will knock it out tomorrow. Otherwise, I'll figure out a way to knock them out next week, especially because the new year is coming up and all that kind of good stuff. So if I do not come back before the end of the new year, I hope everyone who's watched this has a really, really happy and safe new year. And I will see you soon. Bye.